The special report that we planned to bring you tonight was about domestic politics, the battle among the Democrats. But we think the crisis in Iran is more urgent right now than the campaign here at home. Some 60 Americans, including our fellow citizen whom you just saw bound and blindfolded, are now beginning their 6th day of captivity inside the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. It's Friday morning there now. But throughout this night in Washington, officials will continue their search for some way to negotiate the hostages' freedom. That search was not successful today. In this broadcast, we'll have reports on the diplomatic efforts to resolve the problem and on other aspects of the crisis as well. But we begin now with an on-the-scene account by the one American television correspondent who has been there since the beginning, the seizure of the embassy last Sunday, and who, with his crew, has provided us with outstanding coverage all this week. Here is Bob Dyke in Tehran.
This picture tells it all. This flag was apparently taken from someone's office inside the United States Embassy. It was burned Tuesday evening outside the embassy's gates. To the Iranian demonstrators who set fire to it, this was a symbol of victory. 2 days earlier, several hundred young people, mainly students at Tehran University, had taken over the embassy. We are not occupiers, they said. We have thrown out the occupiers. But instead of chasing all the Americans out of the compound, the Iranians imprisoned them in a building somewhere on these grounds. They have been hostages ever since. This morning, for the first time since the hostages were put under lock and key, one of the captives, blindfolded, was brought out into the open.
He is Harry Rosen, the embassy's press attaché.
He was turned to face reporters and cameramen and several hundred Iranian demonstrators outside the embassy's gates. "Yankee, go home," they cried, but they made no attempt to harm him. Eventually, he was led back to join the other captives who have been kept out of sight.
But this young woman was released a few hours after the embassy was seized Sunday. She worked there as a low-level interpreter. She is an Iranian who spent time studying in the United States, and her name is Fareshta Imami, and she recalls how the embassy fell.
You were at the embassy when it was taken over on Sunday.
Yes, I was.
What happened?
About 10:15, a group of demonstrators came in front of the building, in front of the embassy compound, and they walked in.
They walked in?
They actually walked in.
Did anyone try to stop them?
No, I don't believe so.
Because?
They said that they just wanted to stage a sit-in, and they didn't want to harm anyone. They came in front of the chancellery. We saw them through the window. They had a banner saying, "We don't want to harm anyone, we just want to stage a sit-in."
How did the people at the embassy react to that, the guards?
We were taken on the second floor, maximum security floor, and we were given tear gas masks, and we were told to stay calm.
What happened after that?
A couple of hours went by and we heard a siren. When I asked one of the Marines what had happened, they said that they had stormed the building.
They, meaning the students?
The students, yes. They
What
came
happened?
inside the building.
What happened after that?
Well, they came behind the door where we were held, and they said, if you all get out, and if you don't resist, we will not harm anyone, and we just want to stage a sit-in, and we just want to ask a couple of questions. So they came in, the Marines opened the door, and they came in, and they took all of us, blindfolded us, tied our hands behind our backs, and they took us.
Did any of you try to resist?
No, none of us.
Were any shots fired during the takeover?
No, just tear gas canisters.
Were any of the students armed?
No, none of them were armed. A couple of them had sticks.
Were there any fights?
No, no scuffles, no fights.
No scuffles between the U.S. Embassy personnel?
No, everything was calm.
It was another small victory for the activists who are fully backed by their country's supreme ruler, the Ayatollah Khomeini. It seems the Iranian students have the initiative. The next move is evidently up to the United States. Ever since the Shah fled the country last January, there has been a persistent belief in many quarters here in Iran that the United States government was not only in deep sympathy with the deposed ruler and his family, but plotting to restore him to power here, to bring back the Pahlavi dynasty and the imperial court. America's investment here was considerable before the Shah's downfall, billions of dollars spent, much of it for defense. Iran's Army and Air Force, equipped with the latest sophisticated military hardware, including Phoenix missiles and F-14s, was considered vital to Western security. Iran is bordered in the north by the Soviet Union, and American monitoring stations were deployed along the frontier. Despite the embassy takeover, with relations between the two countries never worse than now, Iran's oil pipelines to the U.S. are still open. For how long is for the Ayatollah to say. His followers today at the U.S. Embassy held another news conference, this time to release copies of what the Iranian activists claim are secret United States government documents. If they are genuine, and they look genuine, it would seem that the State Department was deeply worried that Iranians might misinterpret the Shah's admittance to the United States as a move towards restoring him to the peacock throne. This communique, dated last August, says every attempt should be made by embassy officials here in Tehran to convince Iranians that the State Department was resisting efforts to allow the Shah into America, and says we should make no move towards admitting the Shah until we have obtained and tested a new and substantially more effective guard force for the embassy. Bob Dyke, ABC News, Tehran.
The United States is in this fix because the former Shah of Iran is suffering from cancer and is receiving needed treatment in this country. But that explanation, that justification for his presence here is not accepted by the Iranians, who have always suspected the United States was the Shah's ultimate destination. Here's a report from Barry Dunsmore.
February. The Iranian mobs have driven the Shah out, and the question of where he goes becomes an important factor in U.S. policy toward Iran. Initially, it's assumed he will come to the U.S. President Carter even says so publicly. However, it soon becomes evident that the Shah will be an unwanted guest. March, and the Shah is in Morocco. The administration is looking for an emissary to ask the Shah not to come to the U.S. because of the delicate state of relations between Washington and the new regime in Tehran. David Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger are approached. Both angrily refuse, and instead, Kissinger begins a strong campaign to get the Shah into this country. April, Kissinger meets privately with Secretary Vance and also talks to the president. In each case, his message is, a man who for 37 years was a friend of the United States should not be treated like a Flying Dutchman who cannot find a port of call. At this point, Kissinger turns south. He is in direct contact with Mexican President López Portillo. Without too much persuasion, the Mexicans agree to give the Shah a visa. July, Richard Nixon joins the campaign to admit the Shah. He visits him in Mexico and makes the point that this is no way to treat our friends. September, and the administration is still holding firm. Vance makes the point stronger than he's ever made it. Admitting the Shah may seem right, but I do not think it would be in our national interest to do so. He adds, we have had to take into account the possible dangers to American people. He clearly has the embassy compound in mind. Early October, the Shah is ill, and Rockefeller is contacted. He recommends a New York specialist, Dr. Benjamin Keene. Keene goes to Mexico. He finds the Shah very ill and learns of his long bout with a form of cancer. Keene recommends to the State Department that the Shah be brought to New York for treatment, but the department is skeptical. Keene is labeled a Kissinger-Rockefeller doctor. This infuriates Rockefeller, who gets on the phone to protest this absurdity. Finally, State Department doctors review Keene's examination and agree the Shah is very ill. Late October, top officials contemplate the next step. The State Department's number 3, David Newsom, who was the top man on Iran, argues that admitting the Shah, even under these circumstances, could be dangerous. However, the president decides the Shah should be let in. October 22nd, the Shah is admitted to New York Hospital, but not before the government of Iran is told that the decision to admit him is purely humanitarian and not political. The U.S. agrees to send the Ayatollah medical reports, but not to let his doctors examine the Shah. Now, with more than 60 lives at stake, there is a residue of bitterness. There are those who are bitter toward the Shah, and there are sources close to the Shah who say that since the embassy was seized, Washington has once again been trying to get him to submit to an examination by doctors from Tehran. One source claims it was even proposed he be operated on again, just to prove he was ill. The State Department denies both these charges. The decision to allow the Shah in apparently was a calculated risk. It didn't work because the state of anarchy in Iran is such that it's not possible to deal with that country in any logical or rational way.